Hook. The wind cut through the hollow of the abandoned well, carrying whispers I couldn't name. She was there, kneeling on ice, her face pale and frozen like the water beneath her. And when she looked up, her eyes found my hands, and something unspoken passed between us. Winter had claimed the old village long before she appeared, leaving frost on rooftops and silence in narrow streets. I, a quiet carpenter, lived alone at the edge of town, where memories clung to the snow like frost to glass. My days passed in muted rhythm, until that morning when curiosity and dread collided at the frozen well. The snow hadn't melted yet, though the sun was trying. Its first pale light spilled across the village rooftops, touching the frost on the windows like whispered fingers. I pulled my coat tighter around my shoulders, the wool scratching against my neck, and listened. The world felt hollow. My boots pressed into the snow, crunching so loudly it startled me, as if the village itself hadn't yet remembered it was morning. That's when I saw her. She was kneeling beside the well, a small figure framed by the frost that clung to the stone edges. Her breath rose in pale clouds, dissipating slowly into the air. I stopped walking. The cold didn't bother me, the silence did. It pressed in, heavy and watchful. I could feel the frost on my fingertips, stiff and brittle, and still, I reached them toward my coat pockets for warmth I didn't really need. There was something about her. Something that tugged at a memory I couldn't name. I squinted through the pale light, trying to see her face. She didn't look up. Didn't even shift, though her hands trembled slightly against the ice. My boots settled in the snow. I didn't move forward, and yet I couldn't turn away. The village around us was empty. Smoke rose lazily from a few chimneys, curling and vanishing before it could warm the street. The wind carried a brittle, hollow sound, like it had learned to whisper secrets. My eyes traced the frozen path to the well, tracing the tracks she had left. They were careful, hesitant, and familiar. I swallowed. My voice felt small in that vast quiet. "Hello," said. No answer. Just the faint creak of ice beneath her knees, and the whisper of the wind. I tried to step closer, but the snow betrayed me, sinking unevenly beneath my weight. Every step felt loud, clumsy. She didn't flinch. Didn't even glance at me. And still, I recognized something in the line of her shoulders, the tilt of her head. Something I should have remembered. Or maybe something I was afraid to. I stopped a few feet away. The well was old, its stones slick with frost, the circular mouth dark and still. She knelt at its edge, as if the weight of it pressed her down. Her hands rested lightly on the ice, almost afraid to touch it. I felt my own hands tremble. Couldn't explain why. The silence grew thick, almost accusing. Seemed to hold me in place. My breath misted, joining hers in the frozen air, and I realized I had been holding it for a long time. The village had woken, or at least tried to, but we were still here, suspended in the cold. I thought about moving, stepping forward, breaking the spell. But something in her presence, quiet, still, a tension I couldn't name, kept me frozen. I could hear the snow settling around us, the faint scrape of a branch against a roof. I could see the pale light catching on the frost like it was trying to illuminate a secret. I finally found my voice again. "Are you okay?" Still nothing. Her fingers traced a line on the ice, slow, deliberate, almost as if she were following something invisible. I wanted to reach for her, but my feet stayed rooted. I didn't know whether to fear her or recognize her. Something deep in me whispered recognition, but I pushed it down. Better not to hope, better not to guess. The wind shifted again, and I caught a scent, faint, familiar, like wood smoke from a distant fire. It reminded me of my mother's kitchen, or the way my father smelled when he returned from work. I blinked and tried to focus, but the snow blurred the edges, and I couldn't tell where memory ended and the present began. She knelt there for a long time, as if the ice itself had secrets she was trying to hear. I watched her, trying to guess what they might be. The air between us seemed charged, quiet but heavy, as if speaking would shatter it. My mind spun with possibilities. Who was she? Why had she come here? And why did she feel like a fragment of something I had lost long ago? I shifted my weight, the snow crunching again under my boots. She finally stirred, just a little, turning her head slightly toward the sound. Her eyes were still downcast, her face hidden beneath strands of damp hair. And yet, for a heartbeat, our world seemed to narrow to that small motion. I wanted to speak, to reach across the silence, but the words tangled in my throat. I noticed the frost clinging to her eyelashes, tiny crystals catching the light like shards of glass. The air smelled of cold metal and wet earth, and I realized that even the village itself seemed to hold its breath. I could feel it in the crunch of the snow, the way the wind carried its voice across the empty street. I tried again. "Do you need help?" Nothing. And then a flicker. A small movement of her fingers, curling against the ice, hesitant, like she was waiting for permission to exist in the world again. I stayed still, unsure whether to step closer or remain here, in the frozen silence. It didn't feel like fear. Not really. It was anticipation, or maybe recognition, a thread of memory tugging tight between us. I remembered the well from my own childhood, the cold stone under my palms, the way water would reflect the sun in fractured, dizzying patterns. And now she knelt there like an echo of some time I had forgotten. I wanted to call her name, but I didn't know it. I didn't know if I ever had. The wind swirled, lifting loose strands of hair across her face. I watched the mist of her breath rise and fall. And in that moment, I realized I couldn't just walk away. I couldn't ignore her because something in the quiet told me. We were bound to this place, to this frozen edge, in ways I didn't yet understand. I took a slow, careful step forward. The snow pressed down, squeaking beneath my boots. She didn't move. I stopped again, closer now, but not too close. Close enough to see the faint lines of worry etched across her brow. Close enough to feel the tremor in her hands. Close enough to wonder if I would ever know why she had come. And then, the world seemed to settle into a long, tense pause. The sun rose a fraction higher, pale light spilling across the frost, across her back, across the frozen well. I wanted to speak, to break the silence, but I held it. I realized that some answers, if they came at all, would come slowly. For now, I simply watched her kneel at the edge of the ice. And I waited. The wind caught the edge of my coat, lifting it just enough for the chill to bite at my shoulders. I took a careful step closer. Snow crunched beneath my boots, the sound sharp against the heavy quiet. She lifted her head slowly. Not in surprise, not in fear. Just a deliberate, almost measured motion. And then her eyes found my hands. Froze. There was a recognition there. Not of me exactly, but of something I had held and lost long ago. A fragment I had thought buried. A thread I hadn't known I still carried. I could feel it in the curve of her lips, the faint tremor in her breath, the way her fingers hovered just above the frost. The air between us seemed to thicken, carrying memories I didn't yet understand. My own hands felt heavy, weighted with something unspoken. I wanted to speak, to say her name. But I didn't know it. And even if I did, the sound would have felt inadequate. Instead, I stayed still, letting her gaze rest on me, trying to read what she could see that I could not. The wind shifted again. Ice fragments rattled against the edges of the well. They sounded like distant glass breaking, tiny and precise. The cold brushed across my cheeks, harsh and alive. I pulled my coat tighter, though it did little to keep out the chill in my chest. She didn't speak. She only stared. And in that quiet, I felt the weight of a memory pressing against the walls of my mind. Fall. The scrape of skin against stone. Laughter that turned into panic. A small accident I had buried, thinking no one remembered. But she remembered. She remembered it all. I took another step. The snow compressed under my boots, sending a faint crack into the stillness. She flinched, or maybe the wind did. I wasn't sure. She tilted her head slightly, eyes never leaving mine. And then I saw it. The faintest recognition in her lips, the way her chest rose and fell with a rhythm I somehow knew. I tried to remember when we had been here before. Or if we had been at all. My mind threw fragments at me. An ice-covered path. A well cold and dark. The sharp taste of winter on my tongue. Laughter muffled by snow. And then the accident. I hadn't thought of it in years. Not consciously. I had folded it into the corners of my memory. Convinced it belonged to someone else, some other life. But here she was. Kneeling. Watching. Knowing. And suddenly the past wasn't past. It was here. With us. The wind gusted again. It swirled between us, carrying tiny shards of ice across the well's surface. They glinted in the pale light, like stars trapped on frozen water. The sight made my chest tighten. I realized that this moment, this still, quiet acknowledgement, was heavier than any words could carry. She moved slightly, just enough for me to notice the shift in her weight. Her hand brushed the ice, tracing a pattern I didn't recognize, though it felt familiar, as if I had traced it myself in a dream. My heart beat faster. I wanted to ask her who she was. But somehow I knew the question would not matter. Not yet. Instead, I lifted my own hands, letting them hover just above mine, showing nothing, asking nothing. She studied them, and the connection, unspoken and fragile, hummed between us. I remembered the small accident then. Childhood memory, jagged and sudden. I had fallen, skinned my knee on the stones near the well, and someone, a girl, had reached for me. Her hand had touched mine, warm and steady. I had never forgotten that warmth, though I had tried to. And now, decades later, it returned like a ghost I could finally see. My voice was barely a whisper. "Do I know you?" She didn't answer. Not with words. But her eyes softened. Something in them trembled. Recognition. Relief. I couldn't tell which, and maybe it didn't matter. I could feel the truth of it without explanation. The wind carried a sharper chill. Frost swirled in patterns across the edges of the well, each crystal catching the faint light, throwing tiny reflections into her face. It was almost too much to look at. Too much memory. Too much time folded into one frozen morning. I stepped a fraction closer. Snow squished beneath my boots, muffling the sound, as if the ground itself wanted to keep this moment private. She didn't flinch. She didn't move away. And then I saw it. A flicker of something in her hands. Something small. Token. A memory made physical. I couldn't see it clearly, but I knew it belonged to both of us. Somehow. I wanted to reach out. My fingers itched to touch hers, to confirm that what I saw, what I felt, was real. But I didn't. Instead I waited. Breathe. I let the silence stretch, letting it carry the weight between us, letting it tell the story that words could not. And then, slowly, she lowered her hands. Just a little. Enough for me to see the faintest curve of recognition, the echo of something we had both lost and both remembered. I could feel it pressing against my chest, a heaviness I couldn't shake. Not fear. Not sadness. Something else. Something like hope. The wind shifted once more, sweeping across the village rooftops, carrying ice and snow in spirals that danced in the pale light. Her gaze never left mine. And in that gaze I saw the missing piece. Not of the present, but of myself. Of a memory I had buried. A fragment I had tried to forget. She held it there in silence, and I realized that this recognition, this quiet, wordless acknowledgement, was the beginning. I didn't know what came next. I didn't know her name. I didn't know how long she had been here, or why she had returned. But I knew one thing. The past had found us, and for the first time in years, I felt its weight balanced, not broken, not lost. We stayed like that for what felt like hours. The snow fell silently around us, dusting her hair and the edges of the well. My hands remained raised, frozen mid-air, because I couldn't yet cross the distance. She stayed kneeling, silent and still, because she didn't need to. Recognition was enough. And then the sun rose a little higher. Pale light stretched across her back, across the frost, across the world I thought I knew. I didn't speak. She didn't speak. But somehow in that silence I understood that this moment, this recognition, was only the beginning. I stepped back slowly, letting the snow cushion my movement. My chest still tight, my hands still heavy. I knew the next step would come. But not yet. Not today. For now, I watched her kneel by the frozen well, and I waited. The snow lay thick over the village, unbroken except for a narrow trail of footprints. They were scattered, uneven, hesitant, like someone moving through memory rather than space. Each step seemed to weigh heavier than the last, pressing into the white blanket as if afraid of leaving a mark. I followed them quietly, boots crunching softly against the frozen crust. The morning was still pale, almost reluctant to shine, and the wind whispered across rooftops and chimneys. Smoke curled lazily from a few homes, but the streets felt empty, as if the village itself had drawn back, holding its breath. The footprints led to the well. Each one told a story of caution, uncertainty. She had paused several times, judging the snow beneath her knees before kneeling fully at the edge. I could see the slight indentations, the angle of her body leaning forward, and I realized she had been careful. Careful with the ice. Careful with herself. Careful with whatever she carried inside. I knelt beside the well, letting the cold bite at my fingertips. Frost clung to the stones, sharp and brittle. I traced the rim lightly, feeling the texture beneath my glove, rough and uneven, like the surface of memory itself. The footprints faded behind her, but the imprint lingered, heavy with unspoken purpose. She remained silent, watching the well, waiting, and I felt an ache in my chest I couldn't name. The air smelled of snow and frozen earth, tinged with faint wood smoke from distant chimneys. Even the wind seemed hesitant, shifting lightly but never quite touching us directly. I tried to make sense of her presence. Her movement suggested caution, but the intent felt older, deeper. Not the nervousness of a stranger, but the quiet precision of someone returning to something long forgotten. My mind flicked through faces, moments, fragments of my own past. A neighbor's laugh, a childhood friend's scolding, the curve of someone's smile. Some were real. Some were nearly gone. And yet, each felt relevant now. Each felt like a key I hadn't yet turned. The ice beneath her knees shifted slightly, a faint cracking sound that seemed loud against the stillness. She didn't move. She didn't flinch. And I realized she had been here before. Not this morning, not this year, but in memory. In recollection. And somehow I was part of it too, though I didn't yet know why. I reached out my gloved fingers to the frost, testing the cold, feeling the rough edges of the stones beneath. Each touch sent a shiver through my arm. I remembered touches long ago, small hands brushing mine in fleeting moments, warm, deliberate, protective, and I wondered if she had remembered too. The footprints had paused at the edge, hesitant, as though she had considered turning back. But she had continued. And now she waited, her body still and careful, her eyes tracing something invisible across the frozen water. I wanted to speak, to break the silence, but I couldn't. Words would have felt clumsy, unnecessary. I shifted my weight slightly, snow crunching softly under my boots. She lifted her gaze for just a moment, and I caught it. A flicker of recognition, not of me exactly, but of the place, the time, the memory. It was enough to make my chest tighten. Enough to remind me that this well, these stones, and the snow around them were more than geography. They were a repository of moments, of fragments of lives intersecting long ago. I remembered other faces, fleeting, almost forgotten. A friend who had once laughed too loud on a summer day. A teacher whose voice had lingered in corridors. My own mother's shadow across the kitchen floor. They seemed irrelevant until now, until the weight of her presence made them matter again. The snow continued to fall lightly, feathering over her hair and shoulders, softening the outline of her figure. Her posture remained steady, deliberate in its stillness. It was as if she were drawing strength from the frost, from the silence, from the memories the well and the snow carried. I knelt lower, bringing my hands closer to the rim, feeling the bite of the frost. The cold was sharp but grounding. My mind wandered to the accident I had buried, the fragment of memory I had tried to ignore. And there she was, kneeling as if she had come to remind me, to reintroduce me to what I had lost. She shifted slightly, brushing a gloved hand along the ice, leaving tiny traces, small scratches that caught the pale light. They were almost imperceptible, but I noticed. Always noticed. Each mark felt like a punctuation, a note in a conversation I couldn't hear yet. The silence stretched, measured, deliberate. Even the wind seemed to bow around us, carrying only faint hints of sound. The distant clatter of shutters, the soft crack of ice beneath her hands, the rhythm of her breath rising and falling. I found myself mimicking it unconsciously, breathing slowly, carefully, not wanting to disturb the fragile balance of the moment. Memories continued to surface, unbidden. Picnic near a frozen pond. Laughter spilling into cold air. A small accident, a scrape, a hand reaching out in help. I couldn't tell if it was hers or mine. I couldn't tell if it had happened decades ago or yesterday. Only that it mattered now. She remained kneeling, watching the well, waiting, patient in a way that made my own impatience feel clumsy. I realized that she was here for a reason I didn't yet understand, but one that carried the weight of years and silence. I traced another line along the frost, fingertips numb. The cracks in the ice whispered to me, tiny fractures echoing stories of the past. I imagined her stepping carefully across them, one foot in front of the other, pausing with each movement, almost afraid to break what was already fragile. I wanted to ask her why she had come after all these years, but I stopped myself. Some questions demanded time, demanded patience. And for now, the footprints in the snow spoke louder than any words could. They spoke of hesitation, of courage, of a memory that refused to die. I stayed kneeling, watching, feeling the cold settle into my bones. She remained at the edge of the well, silent, deliberate, present. The snow around us shimmered softly in the pale light, catching on her hair and the frost-covered stones. It was beautiful, haunting. And I understood that this moment, fragile and quiet, was only the beginning. The footprints behind her told a story I was only beginning to read. A story of return, a story of memory, and perhaps a story of reckoning. I exhaled slowly, letting the cold air fill my lungs. She didn't look at me, but I felt her awareness. And for the first time I understood that some encounters could speak without words, that some presence could awaken what had long been forgotten. I rose slowly, careful not to disturb the snow, careful not to break the quiet between us. And I watched her, kneeling by the frozen well, waiting. I didn't know what she sought. I didn't know what I would find. But I knew that today, we had begun to remember together. The wind had shifted again, sweeping pale light across the frozen well. Snowflakes clung to my eyelashes, melted on my cheeks, and hung in the air like fragile glass. She finally spoke, her voice almost swallowed by the cold. Elias! The name struck me like a bell long forgotten, hollow, distant, and yet impossibly familiar. I froze, my breath held in my chest, listening. The sound seemed to awaken corners of memory I had carefully sealed away. Childhood laughter, scraped knees, quiet afternoons spent wandering streets I barely remembered, all folded together into that single syllable. The wind picked up, carrying ice shards across the well. Each one landed with a faint, sharp tinkle. Her voice wavered again, smaller this time, almost a whisper against the frozen morning. Do you remember? I wanted to answer, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I let the silence carry me back to a time when the air had smelled of earth and sunlight, when mistakes were small and forgiveness seemed endless. I could see her face as a girl in fragments. The curve of her hair, the tilt of her head, the way her hands had once brushed mine without thought, without hesitation. My own hands tightened into fists, buried in my coat pockets, though the chill bit anyway. I noticed her trembling hands, fragile against the ice. They mirrored my own, and I realized the reflection wasn't just in posture. It was in emotion, in memory, in all the spaces neither of us had dared speak of until now. I knelt closer to the well, letting the frost bite at my fingertips. Each stone felt rough and alive beneath the thin gloves. The well seemed to breathe beneath us, exhaling cold mist, holding secrets it had collected over decades. I imagined what it had seen, Our past selves, small and careless, laughing at dangers we didn't understand, making promises we couldn't keep. She spoke again, slower this time, her voice threading through the wind like smoke. "I've been looking for you." It wasn't a question, and yet the words shook me. The past was tangible now, pressing through the snow and ice, reaching into the spaces I had thought empty. My heart thumped in my chest, each beat loud against the quiet morning. I traced a line along the frost-covered rim, fingertips brushing the cold, imagining the day she had knelt here before. Or had I? My memory was fractured. I saw shadows, a small hand slipping from mine, a cry muffled by snow, the rush of panic I had buried under years of careful forgetting. And now she had returned, not with anger, not with accusation, but with recognition. Recognition of what we had been and what we had lost. She lowered her eyes to the ice, her breath misting in delicate clouds. "I think we left things unfinished." Her words hovered between us, fragile and unsteady. I nodded slightly, though she didn't see. The cold pressed harder now, sharper against my cheeks, and yet I felt a warmth in my chest, strange and foreign, as if the air itself wanted to tell me something I could not yet understand. I tried to speak, tried to fill the silence with something. Anything, but my voice caught in my throat. Instead, I offered a small nod, and she understood. Our memories were pieces of a puzzle neither of us could fully hold. And still, in that moment, recognition alone was enough. The wind shifted again, sweeping a swirl of ice and snow across her shoulders. She shivered, not from the cold, but from the weight of what we were both recalling. I noticed it in the slight curl of her fingers, in the tension in her shoulders. Every detail was a whisper of the past, a reminder that time had moved on, but not entirely erased the moments we shared. I bent slightly over the well, watching her hands trace faint lines in the frost. They were careful, deliberate, as though afraid to disturb something sacred. The gesture mirrored my own instinct to touch the ice, to reach into memory, to anchor myself in the truth of what had happened here long ago. I remembered a game we had played, running through streets dusted with snow, racing to this very well. The thrill of cold air in our lungs. Laughter that became panic when one of us slipped. A hand reaching for another. And then, a sharp, fleeting moment of fear that I had buried under years of denial. She looked up suddenly, her eyes locking with mine. Recognition. Relief. Flicker of sorrow. I didn't speak. Couldn't. There were no words to bridge the decades, no phrases that could capture the weight of shared memory compressed into a single morning. Instead, I let the silence stretch. The well seemed to pulse beneath us, icy breath rising and falling. Snowflakes drifted lazily between us, caught in the morning light, dissolving before they touched skin. Her voice came again, quieter this time, almost like a prayer. "Do you remember me?" I did. I did, and yet I didn't. I remembered the warmth of her hand, the intensity of a glance, the way we had once existed in a world smaller than this village, smaller than our adult selves. But the details were hazy, scattered, fragmented. I reached toward the ice, fingertips hovering, then resting lightly. The cold bit, sharp and immediate, grounding me. I could feel her gaze on me, steady and patient, and for the first time since seeing her, I felt connected. Not to the past entirely, but to the shared space between then and now. She let out a small breath, almost inaudible. Her hands trembled, brushing against the frost in patterns I didn't understand, but that felt familiar. I realized we were both here, kneeling at the edge of memory, letting the well hold what we could not. The wind carried her words again, fragments of names, places, moments. They landed softly, each syllable like a pebble tossed into still water. "Do you remember the snow? The games?" I nodded, though my lips remained still. I could see it all. The hidden paths, the laughter, the accidental falls, the panic, the hands reaching out. And now, decades later, those fragments returned with a weight heavier than any winter morning. The cold pressed against my face. My fingers, stiff and tingling, traced the rim again. Her presence beside me was steady, almost imperceptible, but real. Recognition, memory, and longing coexisted in a fragile balance we did not yet dare disturb. I didn't ask her why she had come. I didn't speak of the accident. I didn't need to. We had both remembered enough for now. Enough to hold the morning, to hold the frost, to hold the names we had whispered across decades. She lowered her gaze, her shoulders easing slightly. The frost clung to her hair, sparkling in the pale light. She didn't look at me, not fully, and yet I felt her acknowledgement. The well breathed beneath us, keeping secrets, holding time in its icy depths, letting the past and present meet for a fleeting moment. I exhaled slowly, letting the air, sharp and cold, fill my lungs. A quiet understanding settled between us. The snow around our knees shimmered faintly, catching on the frost-covered stones like fragments of memory made visible. And for the first time that morning, I felt the weight of the past shift slightly, balanced against the fragile hope of recognition. We stayed like that, silent but aware. The wind whispered, carrying her name, carrying mine, carrying all the things neither of us dared say aloud. A subtle fracture ran across the surface of the well, thin but jagged, catching the pale morning light. Water trickled beneath, almost inaudible, yet every drop seemed loud against the hollow silence around us. I noticed it before she did, and for a moment I couldn't move. My breath caught in my throat. The fracture looked fragile, delicate, yet beneath it lurked something dark, something that had waited decades to be seen. She froze at the edge, hands hovering above the frost. Her body stiffened, as if the well itself was warning her to stay back. I could see the tension coiled along her shoulders, the slight tremor in her fingers. My own hands ached to reach for her, but I stayed still, watching, feeling the quiet urgency swell in the space between us. The village around us was empty. Snow clung to rooftops and fence posts, the wind carrying whispers through chimneys and bare branches. The fracture in the ice seemed to amplify every sound. The scrape of frost against stone, the soft trickle of water beneath, the faint rattle of loose snow falling from a branch above. Time felt suspended, compressed into the fragile moment, and I realized I had forgotten how to breathe normally. Memories rose unbidden, fragments from a long-forgotten childhood. A disappearance, a lost object, a small promise made under the winter sky. The accident I had buried suddenly had a shape, a shadow beneath this fractured ice. And she, kneeling there, hesitant, watching, became the bridge between what was lost and what might be found. Her voice broke the silence, almost a whisper, fragile as the ice. "I've been afraid, all these years." The words settled over me, weighty and real. I could feel the same fear pressing against my chest, a cold, heavy hand I had carried without acknowledgement. It wasn't just her memory. It was mine, shared, bound by that small, fragile well, by the ice that threatened to hold or betray us. I traced the fracture with my gaze, following its jagged path across the surface. Tiny rivulets of water shimmered beneath, catching the muted sunlight, reflecting a sky pale and indifferent. And in that reflection, I saw pieces of us I hadn't remembered. Faces, hands, promises whispered into snow-filled air. A small coin lost, a laugh interrupted, a grip that faltered. She leaned slightly closer, hesitant, as though even the shadow beneath the ice might judge her intentions. Her hands trembled visibly now, tiny movements tracing shapes I couldn't quite understand. My own fingers itched to touch her, to steady her, to reach for the fragile truth hidden beneath the frozen surface. The fracture widened imperceptibly. A small trickle of water seeped through, tiny drops scattering across the ice. Each seemed to carry decades of secrets, of fears, of memories we had both tried to bury. I realized then that this ice, this fragile surface, had held more than water. It had held time. It had held us. She spoke again, her voice almost swallowed by the wind, but clear enough to shake the world around us. "I thought, if I never came back, if I never remembered, it would stay buried." I nodded, though my lips stayed still. Understood. I had tried the same, unknowingly, in my own way. The fracture in the ice mirrored the fracture in our past. Small, tentative, fragile, but undeniable. And now, here it was, waiting to reveal itself fully. I shifted closer to the well, careful not to disturb the snow beneath my knees. The cold stung, sharp and immediate, grounding me in the moment. My eyes traced the fracture again, imagining the layers of water and ice beneath, wondering what had been left there, what had been lost and what could still be found. The wind picked up, carrying thin shards of snow across our shoulders. She flinched, and I realized the shiver wasn't just from the cold. It was the weight of decades pressing down on a fragile moment, demanding acknowledgement. I could feel it too, deep in my chest, as if every breath reminded me of promises and mistakes, of things unseen but never truly gone. She lowered her hands slightly, hovering above the ice, and whispered again, almost inaudibly. "Do you remember the promise?" The words landed like a stone in the center of me. I remembered it, the small, careless promise made under snow-dusted skies, the intention to protect, to hold, to return. I had forgotten, and yet I hadn't. It was hidden beneath years of silence, under layers of self-preservation, waiting for this fracture to open and release it. I wanted to speak, wanted to tell her everything I remembered, wanted to apologize for what had been lost, wanted to fill the air with words that could never fully capture the weight of this moment. But instead I stayed silent, letting the fracture do the talking, letting the ice, the water, the wind, and her presence narrate what words could not. The fracture seemed to breathe beneath us, water shifting faintly, reflecting the pale morning light in trembling, jagged lines. I leaned closer, noticing a small shimmer, maybe a reflection, maybe something tangible beneath the ice. My pulse quickened, a quiet rhythm in the stillness, tying me to the moment, tying me to her. She mirrored my movement, careful, hesitant. Her hand hovered above the ice, then recoiled slightly. Fear and memory intertwined in her gestures, mirrored in my own. The world outside the well seemed to blur. Rooftops, chimneys, snow-dusted streets, all faded until it was just us, the fracture, and the fragile, trembling weight of memory. A shiver ran through her, then through me. I realized that this moment, suspended between ice and memory, between fear and recognition, was more than we could bear alone. We were tethered, connected, and yet cautious, as if the fracture itself might judge the next step. The wind shifted, scattering light across the ice. She whispered a single word, almost lost. "Here." And in that word I felt the gravity of years, the pull of things forgotten and almost lost, the echo of childhood mistakes and silent promises. I realized that beneath this fragile surface lay more than water. It held truth. A truth we had both carried, consciously or not, for decades. I exhaled slowly, letting the cold air fill my lungs, grounding me, steadying me. She didn't look at me, but I felt her acknowledgement, her hesitance, her fear. And I knew, in that suspended morning, that the fracture in the ice was also a fracture in us. One that could heal, one that demanded attention, one that whispered of revelations waiting just beneath the surface. For now, we remained kneeling at the edge, the fracture widening imperceptibly, water trickling beneath, reflecting the pale sky. Time was suspended. The world narrowed to ice and memory. And I knew that what lay beneath, hidden, fragile and precious, would soon demand its unveiling. The snow had settled into a fragile silence, soft and deceptive. And yet I saw it, a shadow moving across the whiteness, sliding along the ground like a thought I couldn't catch. Not cast by the morning sun, not tethered to anything solid. Just a dark ripple, fleeting, elusive. My pulse skipped. The air seemed to tighten around my chest, pressing like the weight of years I had forgotten. She didn't see it at first. Her gaze remained fixed on the well, frozen water shimmering faintly beneath her hands. But then a subtle shift, her shoulders tensed, fingers clutching at her coat. Anxiety whispered in her movements. The shadow, unseen by anyone else, had found us. I tried to steady my breathing. Snowflakes drifted lazily, landing softly on my coat, my hair, the rim of the well. The world was pale and still, but every sense was alert. Footsteps. Well, just wind. Perhaps. And yet, every instinct screamed that someone or something was watching, connected to the secret we had only begun to uncover. The village seemed impossibly distant. Roofs glimmered under frost, chimneys released faint curls of smoke, but none of it mattered. Only the shadow, only the weight pressing down through silence, and only her presence beside me, taut with tension, fragile as ice. I crouched slightly, letting my hands brush the frost again, as if grounding myself would keep the creeping fear at bay. Memories, sharp and sudden, flared in my mind. Small accidents, childhood dares, lost items, laughter interrupted, shouts in corridors that had long since grown quiet. Each fragment cut through me, as crisp and jarring as the ice beneath my fingers. She turned her head slightly, glancing over her shoulder. The movement was quick, anxious, and I noticed the way her breath rose in a thin, wavering mist. "Did you see that?" she whispered, though her voice was barely audible over the sighing wind. "I did," I admitted softly. My eyes didn't leave the snow, tracing the path of the shadow as it flickered again, then vanished behind a fence post. "But I don't know what it is yet." Her hands tightened around her coat, knuckles pale against the fabric. She didn't speak for a long moment. Her gaze was distant, searching, as if trying to pull something from the white air. The silence stretched between us, heavy and tangible, carrying the weight of unspoken truths. I remembered other moments like this. Times when I had felt watched, when memory had whispered warnings I refused to hear. Small signs ignored. Footsteps in empty hallways. Shadows in doorways. All trivial once, until they weren't. And now, kneeling beside the well with her, I felt that same pulse of unease, thick and insistent, running through my veins. A faint sound broke the quiet. Not footsteps exactly, more like snow settling under weight, tentative and uneven. The shadow shifted again, closer this time, brushing past a tree trunk and dissolving into the distance. My heart thumped, loud and urgent. It wasn't just fear. It was recognition, the kind that prickles at the back of your neck and whispers someone knows. She leaned forward, whispering another fragment, almost to herself. "I never thought anyone would see." I caught the tremor in her voice, the fragility in her posture, and I understood. We had both carried this weight, known its presence, but faced it alone. The shadow, unseen by anyone else, was the reminder that history doesn't forget, that secrets have tendrils beyond the moments we live in. I reached toward the ice, fingertips brushing the cold rim, letting the sensation anchor me. Her gaze remained fixed somewhere beyond the well, beyond the snow, searching the emptiness for answers I didn't yet have. And I realized then that the shadow was not just outside us. It was tied to memory, to guilt, to things we had tried to bury long ago. The wind rose suddenly, scattering snowflakes in tiny whirlwinds that caught the morning light. It was beautiful but deceptive. The shadow moved again, subtle, almost hesitant, and the space between its flicker and us felt like a thread stretched taut, ready to snap. She inhaled sharply, pulling her coat closer. "Do you think anyone else remembers?" I didn't answer immediately. The question hung heavy and fragile. I could feel the frost in my lungs, the weight of the past pressing down, and I knew that this moment demanded careful thought, not words. "I don't know," I said finally, voice low, reflective. "But I feel it, the presence, the memory. It's here, even if no one else is." She nodded, almost imperceptibly, and the tension in her shoulders eased slightly. But her eyes remained alert, tracing unseen movements, imagining threats only half real, half remembered. The snow beneath her knees creaked faintly, each sound amplified in the hush of the morning. I bent closer to the well, hands resting lightly on the rim. Water shimmered faintly beneath the ice, reflecting the pale sky, mirroring the fragility of the moment. Shadows of our past seemed to flicker in its surface, distorted and fragmented. I imagined faces, promises, lost items, and quiet mistakes, all mingling beneath the ice, waiting to be acknowledged. She spoke again, voice trembling, almost broken. "I've carried this alone for so long." I felt the same weight pressing on my chest. For decades, I had buried pieces of myself, fragments of memory too sharp to touch. And now, beside her, with a shadow moving unseen and the wind whispering through the empty village, I understood that our shared past was alive, watching, demanding recognition. A sudden stillness settled over us. The wind ceased its whispering for a heartbeat. The shadow flickered one last time at the edge of the clearing, and then it was gone, leaving only silence, snow, and the fragile tension between memory and reality. Her hands relaxed slightly, but her gaze remained wary. I could see her fighting with herself, caught between fear and the need to remember, between the shadow outside and the truth beneath the ice. And I realized that this, more than anything, was why we were here, not just for memory but for acknowledgement. I exhaled, letting the cold air fill my lungs, steadying myself. "We're not alone in this," I said softly, though the words were more for myself than her. "Even if no one else sees it." She didn't respond, but the small nod, the slight tilt of her head, said enough. Awareness was shared. Fear was mutual. Memory was alive. The snow settled again, gentle, soft, masking everything except the quiet urgency in our hearts. The shadow had vanished, but the sense of being watched lingered. Not threatening, not malevolent, but persistent, like a reminder that the past has roots too deep to be severed. I rose slowly, careful not to disturb the snow beneath my knees, and glanced at her. She didn't look at me, not fully, but her presence beside the well felt tethered to mine. For the first time that morning, I realized that the shadow wasn't just a thing in the snow. It was the echo of memory, the residue of choices long ago, a witness to the secrets we had both carried. And in the quiet, I understood. We had more to uncover. Something had been watching all along. The morning light was pale, filtered through clouds low and heavy above the village. Snow lay in thick, uneven blankets, muffling sound, swallowing footprints. And then, among the frost-crusted stones of the well, I saw it. Her hands tracing something frozen into the ice. I stepped closer, boots crunching softly, heart thudding with a strange rhythm. The air was still, but it seemed thick with memory, with moments I hadn't allowed myself to remember. The small object beneath her fingers glimmered faintly, catching the dim light like a secret unwilling to stay hidden. Her voice was a whisper, hesitant. "Is this?" Froze. The shape was familiar, impossibly so. My mind tumbled backward through years, through laughter that had once echoed across streets dusted with snow, through cries muffled by winter winds, through a small hand slipping from mine in panic. And there it was, the pendant I had lost long ago, buried in memory, now frozen into this well as though time itself had preserved it. I knelt beside her, careful not to disturb the delicate frost. The cold bit at my fingertips, but I barely noticed. My eyes traced the contours of the pendant, tiny, worn, yet unmistakable. It was more than metal and chain. It was a fragment of a life we had shared, a piece of the past that had refused to disappear. She looked up at me, wide-eyed, trembling. "I didn't know it would still be here," she murmured. Her fingers hovered, afraid to touch it further, as though movement might shatter the fragile bridge between memory and reality. I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of decades settle on my chest. The world had narrowed to frost and silence, to this tiny token, to her presence beside me. I lost it," I whispered. The words sounded weak, almost ridiculous against the immensity of what we were facing. And yet they were true. I had lost it, and in losing it I had lost a part of myself. Her eyes followed mine, reflecting both recognition and something deeper. Shared grief, shared loss, the kind of pain that spans years and does not diminish with time. She spoke slowly, almost as if testing the sound. It connects us, doesn't it?" I nodded, unable to look away from the pendant. The ice beneath it was fragile, veins of frost radiating outward, and it felt symbolic. The object was more than a trinket. It was a key, a memory, a tether between our past and the present, bridging the silence of decades. Fragments of memory flickered in my mind, a laugh sharp and brief, a stumble, a fall, a scream swallowed by snow, hands clasping then slipping. Each fragment cut through me, visceral and disorienting. The pendant tied them together, made them tangible, made the past insist on being seen. She traced it again, gently, with a fingertip trembling under the cold. I remember. I think I remember now. I leaned closer, voice barely above the wind. Tell me. Her words came in halting sentences, fractured like the ice beneath the pendant. It was a promise. We swore we'd never forget. I thought I had, but seeing this. She paused, eyes glistening. I see it again. The air between us seemed to hum with the weight of years. Time compressed, expanded, and folded over itself. Memories long buried rose like smoke, curling into shapes that made the morning shimmer and shift. I could see my younger self, laughing carelessly, chasing her across streets dusted with snow, fingers brushing against hers in a fleeting grasp that felt infinite at the time. I reached toward the pendant, careful, mindful of the ice and the fragile moment. My fingers hovered just above hers, but I did not touch. The past was delicate, easily shattered. She let me be, letting the silence and memory carry us forward. I hid it, she whispered finally. After everything, I wanted to keep it safe. I didn't know it would lead me back. I exhaled slowly, letting cold air fill my lungs. My pulse had slowed slightly, but a sharp awareness remained, a sense that this small object was more than just a memory. It was the center of something larger, a key that could unlock truths long hidden. The wind shifted, stirring snow around us in tiny flurries. It brushed across her hair, across the rim of the well, catching on the frost like scattered fragments of light. She looked at me then, fully, the recognition and relief mingling in her gaze. I think we've been looking for this all along, she said, voice fragile but certain. He nodded. Words failed me, as they always did in moments like this. The pendant, small and unassuming, was a bridge across decades of silence, fear and uncertainty. It was proof that the past was alive, that memory persisted, and that some connections cannot be severed, no matter how long they are forgotten. I traced the rim of the well again, letting my fingers brush the frost, feeling the cold bite, grounding me in the present. Snowflakes landed softly, melting immediately, tiny reminders that time moved, yet carried fragments forward like seeds in the wind. She knelt beside me, hands trembling slightly, and held the pendant up toward the pale sky. The morning light caught it, sending faint glimmers across her face. She didn't speak, she didn't need to. The silence was enough, heavy with understanding, with shared memory, with acknowledgement of all that had been lost and found again. The air was still. The world around us seemed to pause, suspended in frost and memory. I could feel my chest loosening slightly, the tension of decades beginning to ease, just enough to breathe fully again. And yet, the pendant remained a reminder, fragile, small, and impossibly significant. Finally spoke, voice low, reflective. This could be the key. She nodded, eyes fixed on the trinket, tracing its familiar contours. To everything, she whispered. We sat like that for a long moment, letting the past and present coexist, letting the fragile ice hold our memories, letting snowfall carry away the silence we could no longer bear. And in the quiet, I realized, the fragments of the past were not gone. They had only been waiting for this moment, waiting to remind us of what we had lost, and what we could still find. The morning air pressed against my face, sharp and unyielding. Snowflakes drifted in slow spirals, landing on eyelashes, coats, and the frozen surface of the well. The village seemed to hold its breath. And there, beside the ice, she began to speak. Her voice was fragile, a whisper carried on the wind, but it cut through the quiet like a shard of glass. Tears glinted on her cheeks, frozen before they could fall. The cold was merciless, biting fingers and cheeks alike, yet it was not the cold that made my hands tremble. It was the weight of words, long buried, surfacing now in hesitant, broken fragments. She didn't look at me. Her eyes stayed fixed on the well, as if it could absorb her confession, as if the ice could carry away guilt and shame. I should have been here, she whispered. I should have. Her voice faltered, swallowed by the wind. I wanted to speak, to reassure her, but the gravity of her admission pressed me silent. Every word hovered in the air, echoing faintly against the frozen stones. It was as though the world itself was listening, attentive and solemn, waiting for us to unearth what had been hidden for decades. I knelt closer, letting my hands rest against the frost. The cold bit through gloves, through layers, but it grounded me. I traced a finger along the ice, imagining the years stacked like sediment beneath it, memories pressed down and obscured. She shivered beside me, her hands clutching the small pendant we had discovered. I was afraid, she admitted, voice low and trembling. Afraid of what would happen if anyone remembered. If anyone knew. Her hands shook, betraying years of restraint. I thought keeping quiet would make it go away. The words struck me in a way silence never could. I had carried my own fragments, my own guilt, and hearing hers mirrored my own hidden truths. My chest tightened, a slow, steady pressure that refused to ease. My fingers, brushing frost, tingled not from cold but from the force of revelation. The well lay between us, its frozen surface a mirror of our fractured past. Tiny cracks ran like veins across the ice, capturing light, reflecting the gray morning sky. Each reflection seemed to hold a memory. A laugh, a stumble, a scream muffled by snow, all fragments of a time we had both tried to forget. I left, she continued, voice breaking, because I couldn't face it. I thought distance would make me stronger. But it didn't. It never did. She glanced at me briefly, and in that gaze, I saw the reflection of my own regrets. Absences I had endured, decisions I had buried, and a fear that the truth might be too heavy to carry. I exhaled, letting the air fill my lungs, sharp and icy. Words failed me, as they always did in moments like this. The silence between us became tangible, stretching across the snow, across the frost, across decades. And yet, in that silence, there was also connection, fragile but undeniable. I began, voice low, unsure if it could bear the weight. I never stopped thinking about it. About you. About everything. My hands shook slightly, brushing the frost again as though touching it might make the memories less jagged. I carried my own fear, my own guilt. And maybe that's why it took so long to see you here. She nodded slowly, letting her tears fall now, some melting on contact with the ice, some remaining suspended like frozen jewels on her cheeks. I thought the past could stay buried, she whispered. But the well, it remembers everything. Doesn't it? I didn't answer immediately. I watched the pendant in her hands, the faint glimmer catching the morning light, a tiny anchor in a vast white emptiness. The ice beneath it seemed to pulse with memory, as if the well itself acknowledged the weight of our confessions. Her voice broke the quiet again. I'm sorry, she said, barely audible, for every time I wasn't there, for every moment I let you carry alone what we should have shared. The apology hovered between us, stark and crystalline, heavier than the snow, colder than the morning air. I wanted to reach for her, to bridge the gap, to tell her it was understood, that forgiveness could exist in silence, in acknowledgement, in this frozen confession. Instead, I simply let my hand hover near hers, a cautious offer, a gesture without words. She felt it, I think, because her grip on the pendant loosened slightly, though her eyes remained locked on the well. The wind shifted again, carrying tiny fragments of snow across the clearing. Each flake caught in her hair, on my coat, on the rim of the well, like scattered pieces of memory finally settling into place. I realized then that confession, no matter how painful, is a kind of warmth. It seeps slowly, imperceptibly, into the coldest places. I was scared of losing you, she admitted, voice trembling. But I see now. I never truly could. Even when I wasn't here, you were still in my memory. Still part of me. My chest felt impossibly full, heavy, and yet there was relief in it. A quiet, fragile lifting of something I had carried unknowingly. The frost beneath our fingers didn't matter as much anymore. The cold pressed against our faces, yes, but inside, a thaw had begun, however slight, however delicate. I carried the same fear, I admitted softly, voice breaking just slightly. I thought that by staying silent I was protecting us. But it only built walls. She nodded, a faint tremor running through her shoulders. For a moment, the world outside seemed to disappear, leaving only us, the well, the frost, and the fragile bridge between memory and confession. The morning light shifted, pale sun rays cutting through the clouds in thin streaks. They illuminated the pendant in her hands, the ice beneath it, the subtle tremors in both our fingers. Every detail, small and precise, felt like a revelation. And in that stillness, I understood something essential. The well had kept its secrets for decades, yes, but it had also preserved truth. Truth waits patiently, even under frost and snow, until we are ready to face it. She finally looked at me fully, eyes glistening but steady. "Are we ready?" she whispered. I exhaled slowly, letting the cold air fill my lungs. I didn't have an answer in words. But in that moment, with frost and confession surrounding us, I knew we would find out together. The snow settled around us again, quiet and patient, holding our confessions as if the world itself had learned to listen. And in that silence, heavy with understanding and tentative hope, the well seemed almost alive, breathing beneath the ice, keeping watch over what had been unearthed. The morning light was shifting, soft and pale, brushing the village with a fragile glow. Snowflakes drifted lazily, melting into the frozen crust beneath our boots. The well lay ahead, still and silent, a mirror of all the years we had avoided. And yet now, with the pendant in sight and our breaths mingling in the cold air, the moment felt like the beginning of something we had both been waiting for without knowing it. I knelt closer to the ice, the frost biting through my gloves, but it no longer mattered. The chill was only a frame for what we were about to do. She mirrored my movements, hands hovering just above the surface, eyes fixed on the fracture that had grown overnight. The wind carried faint whispers across the snow, or maybe it was just the echo of our shared past. We exhaled together, a quiet rhythm, a pact without words. And then, slowly, carefully, we pressed down on the ice, small, measured pressure, until the surface gave way with a brittle, almost musical crack. Water rushed up, icy and alive, spilling over our fingers and wrists. The cold shocked us, sharp as truth itself, but there was no panic, only awareness. The pendant floated briefly, shimmering under the pale sunlight. I cupped it in my hands, the chill seeping into my skin but feeling strangely cleansing. It was a piece of the past, yes, but in retrieving it, we were reclaiming more than memory. We were reclaiming acknowledgement, confession, and the fragile trust that had lain dormant all these years. She watched me, eyes wide, face pale from the cold and emotion. It's really here," she whispered. Her fingers brushed the surface of the water, tentative, reverent. All of it, the past, the fear. Everything we thought was lost. I nodded, words unnecessary. The pendant was small, unassuming, yet it carried the weight of decades. The water dripped from our hands, the ice settling back into its frozen frame, and for a moment, the well seemed ordinary again. But it was not ordinary. It had borne witness, had held secrets, and now it had given them up. The snow around us began to sparkle under the pale sun, faint light dancing across frozen crystals. Each flake glinted like a tiny revelation, tiny affirmations of what we had just done. The act of breaking the ice felt symbolic, a rupture of fear and silence, leaving space for clarity, for quiet understanding. We knelt together for a moment, hands hovering near the pendant, neither of us speaking. Time had slowed, as though it too were paying attention. The world beyond the village, beyond the well, felt distant. Here, in this narrow circle of snow and ice, we were suspended, caught between memory and the present, between past mistakes and the possibility of closure. "I didn't think," she started, voice trembling. "I didn't think it could still matter after all this time." I looked at her, a faint smile brushing my lips. "It does," I said softly. "It matters because we remember. Because we finally see it. Because we see each other." The pendant glimmered, dangling briefly between her fingers and mine. Our hands hovered over it together, the cold forgotten now, replaced by a shared heartbeat, a quiet acknowledgement that we had crossed something invisible but immense. The air smelled faintly of thawing snow, crisp and clean. The wind shifted, carrying it through our hair, across our faces, as if the world itself was exhaling, relieved. We both shivered, but this time it was from release, not fear. I traced the pendant slowly with a fingertip, feeling the grooves and scratches worn by time. She followed my movement with her eyes, lips parted slightly, as though waiting for the right words. But no words were necessary. The act itself, retrieving what had been lost, was a language older and truer than any conversation. The ice beneath the well had once been a barrier, solid, unyielding, and distant. Now it was fractured, broken, and reshaped by our hands. And in that fracture we saw ourselves reflected. Two figures shaped by memory, by absence, by shared history, finally acknowledging what had been hidden for so long. "Do you feel it?" she asked softly, voice barely audible over the whisper of snow. I nodded, taking a deep breath. "I do. Different now. Lighter." The pendant rested finally in my palm, cold but tangible, a bridge between what was and what could be. "We've carried this for decades, and now it's here." She let out a soft sigh, exhaling into the crisp air. Her hands touched mine, fingers brushing as we passed the pendant back and forth, testing its weight, testing the reality of what had been reclaimed. The gesture was small, intimate, heavy with unspoken acknowledgement. The sun, pale and tentative, brightened slightly, striking the snow in delicate, dancing shards of light. Each crystal caught it differently, glittering like fragments of our shared past scattered across the frozen landscape. For the first time in years, it felt possible to breathe without the burden of unspoken truth pressing on our chests. "I never thought we'd," she began, voice breaking slightly. Then she stopped, letting the silence carry what words could not. I nodded in agreement. Some things, after all, are felt more than spoken. The pendant, once lost, now rested between us, not just as an object, but as a testament. It was proof that the past, however painful, could be faced. That bonds, fragile as ice, could be rebuilt. That acknowledgement and memory could coexist with hope. We stood together, hands wet and fingers tingling from cold, looking down at the well. The ice had settled back into its frozen frame, but the fracture remained, a reminder of what had been broken and what had been reclaimed. The act had changed something between us, subtle, silent, irreversible. I felt her hand brush mine again, a light, tentative touch. This is different," she whispered. "Yes," I said, voice low and steady. "We are different. And maybe that's enough." We didn't speak further. The world around us, quiet and sparkling under the pale sunlight, seemed to wait, patient and knowing. We stayed kneeling for a while longer, letting the moment settle, letting memory and ice breathe together. And in the silence, I realized that what we had done, breaking through the ice, retrieving the object, confronting the past, had forged something new. A bond, fragile and tempered, built not just on memory, but on courage, acknowledgement, and the shared act of reclaiming what was once lost. The wind lifted, snow drifting lightly across our shoulders. The pendant glinted one last time, catching the morning sun. I slipped it gently into my pocket, feeling its weight, feeling its presence, knowing that what had been broken was now held in our hands, not just as a relic, but as a promise. The well was quiet now. Silent, still, almost ordinary, though it had held decades of secrets beneath its icy surface. Snow drifted lazily across the rim, landing on the frost like tiny, deliberate whispers. I lingered a moment longer, watching the way the morning light struck the frozen water, catching tiny cracks that had once seemed insurmountable. She stood beside me, her breath misting in the cold air, fingers brushing the pendant gently. The warmth of it, the faint weight, seemed to radiate beyond her hand, spilling between us in subtle pulses. It was a quiet, almost imperceptible feeling, but enough to fill the empty spaces left by years of silence. The village around us remained still. Roofs buried under snow, smoke curling from chimneys in slow, hesitant wisps. No birds sang. No footsteps interrupted the calm. It felt as though the world had paused, waiting for something small, human, to happen between us. I exhaled slowly, feeling the frost settle in my lungs and then ease as my chest unclenched. The weight of decades hung lighter now, the old ache of memory softened by acknowledgement, by confession, by the act of reclaiming what had been lost. I glanced at her. She didn't look at me yet, but the slight curve of her lips hinted at relief. We stepped back from the well together, boots crunching softly on snow crusted thin over frozen ground. The sound seemed louder than usual, carrying across the still village, echoing faintly in the air like a tentative heartbeat. I matched her pace, careful to keep the distance small, yet respectful, aware that silence could hold more than words sometimes. The pendant swung gently in her hand, catching the pale sunlight. Each flicker of light seemed to remind me that what had been broken could still reflect beauty, that even frost and ice could hold warmth when handled carefully. For decades we had tiptoed around these truths, and now, for the first time, we carried something tangible to anchor the memory. "Do you feel different?" she asked quietly, voice barely above the whisper of snowflakes landing. I nodded, uncertain if words could capture the subtle change. "I think so," I admitted. "Not everything is fixed, but it feels lighter, less heavy." My words hung in the air, unfinished, like smoke dissolving in the cold. She nodded, eyes on the ground as we walked. "Yes," she said softly. "I didn't know it could feel like this, like the past isn't a chain anymore." Her fingers tightened slightly on the pendant, then relaxed, letting it swing freely. The simple act was almost ceremonial, a quiet acceptance of both what we had endured and what we could now leave behind. I looked around at the village. Windows frosted over, footprints from earlier days fading beneath fresh snow. Every detail seemed sharper, clearer, somehow more intimate now that the burden between us had shifted. We were walking away, yet the well, the ice, the memories remained behind, contained, acknowledged, no longer pressing on us. I noticed her hands tremble slightly, and I realized mine did too. Not from cold, not from fear, from the weight of what we had carried and the subtle new lightness of having let it go. We didn't speak. There was nothing urgent to say. The crunch of boots on snow became our rhythm, quiet but affirming, guiding us forward. We paused briefly at the edge of the village square, the pendant glinting with each sway. Light caught it just so, tiny flecks dancing like sparks in the morning air. For a moment, I felt that the object wasn't just a token of the past, but a compass pointing toward reconciliation, toward understanding, toward a future where absence and guilt no longer ruled. "Can we truly move forward?" she whispered, voice low, almost tentative, as though asking permission from the cold air itself. I paused to consider. "I think we can," I said. "It won't be perfect, but it can be real." I offered a small smile, and she returned it, faint but genuine, like sunlight slipping through clouds. Our steps resumed side by side, almost synchronized now. The snow held our prints for only moments before covering them again, erasing the evidence of where we had been, yet the act of walking together carried more permanence than any mark on the ground. Each step felt deliberate, slow, careful, an echo of the care we had taken to uncover the past, and now to honor it. The village seemed to breathe with us. Chimneys smoked, faint noises from distant houses punctuated the quiet, and the wind shifted, gentle but persistent, scattering snowflakes in patterns that caught the eye. Everything felt vivid, alive, as though our reconciliation had awakened the world around us in some imperceptible way. I glanced at her again. She didn't meet my eyes, not fully, but the tilt of her head suggested acknowledgement, relief, and a fragile hope. We were still carrying questions, fragments of what had happened, choices we couldn't fully undo, memories that would always linger. But the heaviest weight had been lifted, and that was enough for now. The pendant caught the sun again, a tiny signal in the pale morning. Its presence was a reminder, not of guilt, but of endurance, of survival, of the quiet courage it takes to face what you've buried and to emerge walking side by side with someone who once shared that burden. I exhaled, letting the cold air fill my lungs. My fingers brushed hers as we walked, accidental but intentional, a silent acknowledgement that the bond we had forged in ice and memory was not fragile but tempered, strong enough to carry the possibility of trust, connection, and something new. The snowflakes swirled around us as we approached the edge of the village, the open landscape stretching ahead, pale and inviting. Footsteps in the snow marked progress, movement, and the subtle momentum of life continuing. Each crunch sounded like a small affirmation. We had faced the past, and we were still standing, still walking, still together. She finally spoke, voice soft but steady. "I don't know what comes next, but I think it's okay." I nodded, looking forward at the horizon where the sun began to lift higher, scattering a warm glow across the snow. "It's okay," I said. "We can let it be okay." The pendant swung once more in her hand, catching the light in a fleeting glimmer. It was a quiet symbol, a tiny pulse of hope carried out of the frost and into the possibilities ahead. And as we walked side by side, boots crunching, breath mixing with cold air, I realized that moving forward was less about erasing the past and more about acknowledging it, carrying it lightly, and letting it guide without weighing down. The village receded behind us. The well, silent and still, waited, holding its secrets in the quiet ice, but no longer demanding we bear them alone. Snow fell softly around us, a gentle, constant reminder that life, like winter, could be harsh and unforgiving, yet also tender and patient. And in that moment, walking away, I understood something essential. Some bonds are forged in frost and memory, but they carry the warmth of acknowledgement, the quiet strength of confession, and the subtle, enduring promise that we can walk forward without the shadow of what happened here. The wind moved gently across the village, carrying flakes of snow that sparkled like fragile glass in the pale sunlight. I watched her pause at the edge of the clearing, the well now just a frozen shadow behind us. She turned slowly, as if reluctant to leave, and for a moment the world held its breath. Her eyes met mine, a look that carried years of unspoken understanding, of guilt and forgiveness intertwined. I could see it there, hovering in the faint curve of her gaze, something I had never allowed myself to hope for. A small, tentative smile appeared, barely breaking the chill that had lingered in our hearts, yet enough to feel like warmth on a winter morning. The village remained silent around us. Roofs were dusted in white, chimney smoke drifting lazily into the cold sky. Even the trees seemed to pause, their branches still, as if acknowledging the weight of what had passed between us. I stood a few paces away, boots crunching softly on the snow, my breath visible, forming tiny clouds that disappeared almost as quickly as they appeared. She spoke, or perhaps the wind carried her voice, faint and fleeting. "Thank you," it sounded like, though I wasn't certain. Maybe it was thanks, maybe it was forgiveness. Either way, it settled over me like a gentle promise, a reminder that we had faced the past together and emerged with something neither of us could have predicted. I felt the pendant swing lightly in her hand, catching the light in a tiny, deliberate gleam. It had carried us through frost and memory, through unspoken fears and buried secrets, and now it rested in the palm of her hand like a small talisman against time itself. I wondered, for the 100th time, if some objects could hold the weight of reconciliation, if memories and physical remnants of the past could somehow anchor the present. The crunch of our footsteps on the snow seemed amplified in the silence, each step deliberate, thoughtful. I kept my pace slow, unwilling to rush the moment, knowing that endings deserved care, even quiet ones like this. Her shadow stretched ahead of her, long and thin, merging with the soft contours of the village's edges. I could feel the subtle shift in the air between us, a fragile equilibrium where trust and understanding now balanced. For a moment, I imagined the years slipping away, the mistakes, the missed chances, the things left unsaid. They were still there, of course, lingering in frost patterns and footprints that would soon vanish under fresh snow. But their weight had changed. It had been lifted, not by force or confrontation, but by acknowledgement, by the simple act of being present together in this quiet place. She took a slow step toward the path leading from the village, then paused again, glancing back. That glance, fleeting, almost imperceptible, held everything. Regret, relief, recognition, and perhaps a hint of hope. It was a glance that told me we were both leaving something behind, yet carrying the essential pieces forward, like seeds hidden in a pocket of snow waiting for spring. I watched her fingers tighten once around the pendant, then relax, letting it swing freely again. The way she moved was deliberate, careful, as if even a small gesture could honor the fragility of what had just transpired. I felt my own hands itch to reach out to hold something tangible, but I resisted, realizing that the moment was hers as much as mine, and some things must remain unclaimed to retain their meaning. The wind carried more than snow. It carried echoes of memory. I could almost hear the laughter of childhood games, the faint tremor of a scolding long past, the muffled panic of missteps we never spoke of. They hovered in the air, subtle and insistent, yet no longer oppressive. They had been acknowledged, given form in confession and quiet action, and now they simply existed, neither threatening nor begging for attention. She took another step, soft, deliberate, and I felt the subtle shift in the air around me. The space between us expanded slightly, yet the connection remained unbroken, intangible but undeniable. A bond forged in frost, in ice and memory, now moved forward with us, lightened by acknowledgement but strengthened by the shared endurance of our past. The village remained calm, silent witnesses to our small ceremony. Windows reflected the pale sky, icicles glinted faintly along roof edges, and smoke curled upward like slow fingers reaching for warmth. Each detail, though ordinary, seemed infused with significance because of the history now resting quietly between us. It was as if the village itself had been waiting for this moment, and now, satisfied, could return to its gentle indifference. She paused at the very edge of the path, one last time, turning her head slightly. Her gaze lingered, soft but deliberate, and I caught a flicker of something I hadn't expected. Closure, not complete perhaps, but enough to carry us forward. I nodded slightly, almost imperceptibly, as if to say, "It's enough. We are enough." Her lips curved into a final smile. Small, fragile, yet undeniable. It broke something inside me, though not in the way sorrow might. It cracked the ice that had lingered over our hearts for years, letting light seep through, subtle but real. I felt the warmth, faint but persistent, spreading slowly from chest to fingertips, carrying the assurance that the past had been honored and the future, though uncertain, could still be ours to shape. The wind shifted, scattering tiny snowflakes around us, and with them a whisper of her voice almost lost. "Goodbye, or until next time." I wasn't sure if I had heard her correctly, but it didn't matter. The intent, the release, the acknowledgement, that was enough. I stepped onto the path leading home, boots sinking slightly into the fresh snow. Each crunch echoed softly, a rhythm that matched the steady beat of my heart. The village receded behind me, the well no longer looming, the frozen surface finally at peace. Memories lingered as they always do, but their edges had softened, and their weight had lessened. I glanced back once more, catching a final glimpse of her silhouette framed by pale light. The pendant glinted faintly in her hand, a tiny deliberate pulse against the snow's whiteness. She was moving, walking toward life beyond this place, and I realized that I too was moving, carrying forward what mattered, leaving behind what no longer served. The air felt different now, lighter, though the frost still clung to cheeks and hands. A subtle warmth lingered where our histories had collided, a reminder that some endings are beginnings, quiet, soft and real. I exhaled, letting the snow-laden wind carry away the last traces of old fear, old regret, and stepped forward with deliberate care, aware that life had shifted irrevocably, but with the possibility of new paths. I did not know if we would ever return to this place. Perhaps we would. Perhaps this was the final chapter, meant to be closed with fragile dignity. Either way, I walked on, boots crunching, breath mingling with the wind, aware that something profound had occurred. A reconciliation without words, a truth held quietly, like the glint of sunlight on snow. And with each step, I realized that endings could be gentle, that release could be measured not in loud proclamations, but in small glances, faint smiles, and the quiet knowledge that, for once, we had faced the past together and were free to move forward.